The transformation of warfare in the early modern period was driven largely by the introduction and mastery of gunpowder technology. Among the powers that embraced this innovation most effectively, the Ottoman Empire stands out. By adopting advanced artillery, the Ottomans redefined military strategy, logistics, and siegecraft, culminating in the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, a moment that reshaped both European and Middle Eastern history. Before the widespread use of gunpowder, fortifications dominated military thinking. High walls, towers, and moats provided cities with near impregnable defenses. Armies relied on infantry, cavalry, and siege engines, such as trebuchets, to overcome these obstacles. However, the arrival of cannons and firearms changed the calculus of warfare. The Ottomans recognized the potential of gunpowder early. During the reigns of Murad II and Mehmed the the empire invested in the development of artillery foundries, the training of specialized crews, and the integration of cannons into both field armies and sieges. This investment reflected strategic foresight. Success in conquest now depended on firepower as much as on numbers or maneuver. Artillery technology in the Ottoman Empire advanced rapidly. Cannons were cast in bronze or iron, with calibers large enough to breach formidable stone walls. The Ottomans were willing to undertake engineering feats to transport these massive weapons over rough terrain, using oxen, sledges, and elaborate pulley systems. Such logistics required planning, coordination, and manpower on an unprecedented scale. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453 stands as the defining example of Ottoman artillery in action. Mehmed the deployed an array of cannons, including some of the largest in the world at that time. The massive bombardment systematically weakened the Theodosian walls, previously considered impervious. This allowed Ottoman forces to exploit breaches, combining artillery fire with infantry assaults, sappers, and naval blockades. The psychological impact of gunpowder artillery was as significant as its physical effect. The thunderous roar of cannons, the destruction of fortifications, and the sense of inevitability it created demoralized defenders. European observers were both terrified and fascinated, recognizing that traditional defensive strategies were becoming obsolete. Beyond Constantinople, Ottoman artillery transformed campaigns throughout Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Siegecraft became more predictable, structured, and effective. Fortified cities could no longer rely solely on height and thickness of walls. Counter-battery tactics, sapping, and coordinated infantry attacks became essential. The empire's engineers developed techniques to repair, reinforce, and adapt fortifications, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of the interaction between offense and defense. Field battles were also affected. Cannons, though less mobile than infantry or cavalry, could dominate open terrain by disrupting enemy formations, covering retreats, and supporting charges. The Ottomans integrated artillery into combined arms tactics, coordinating firepower with janissaries, cavalry, and auxiliary troops. This adaptability ensured that artillery contributed to both siege and field victories. Training and specialization were central to effective artillery use. The Ottomans maintained dedicated corps, skilled in aiming, firing, and maintaining guns. Knowledge of ballistics, metallurgy, and logistics was disseminated among engineers and gunners, creating a professional military cadre that could be deployed wherever needed. This institutionalization of gunpowder expertise gave the empire a strategic edge over adversaries who relied on ad hoc artillery or lacked comparable technical skill. The adoption of gunpowder did not occur without challenges. Early cannons were prone to misfires, explosions, and structural failure. Transporting heavy artillery over mountains and rivers required enormous effort. Ottoman commanders invested in solving these problems through engineering innovation, training, and careful planning. Moreover, reliance on artillery reshaped Ottoman military culture. Siege warfare became central to strategic thinking, and commanders learned to integrate firepower with psychological warfare, diplomacy, and political strategy. Cities and fortresses could be subdued without necessarily annihilating populations, allowing for more sustainable expansion and governance. The broader implications of Ottoman mastery of gunpowder technology were profound. By demonstrating that advanced artillery could overcome even legendary fortifications, the empire inspired other powers to modernize their own forces. European states accelerated development of cannon technology and fortification design. ushering in a new era of military science. The conquest of Constantinople symbolized this transformation. It marked the end of the medieval fortress era and the beginning of gunpowder dominated warfare. The fall of the city not only gave the Ottomans a strategic and symbolic capital, but also reshaped trade routes, diplomatic relationships, and the balance of power between East and West. In the decades that followed, Ottoman artillery continued to influence military campaigns. Siege techniques became more standardized, field armies more integrated, and imperial expansion more feasible. The combination of technical mastery, logistical skill, and strategic vision allowed the empire to maintain a competitive advantage for centuries. Ultimately, the Ottoman adoption of gunpowder and cannons illustrates a broader lesson in military history. Technological innovation, when combined with organization, training, and strategy, can redefine the rules of conflict. By mastering artillery, the Ottomans turned a military revolution into an instrument of empire, demonstrating that power in the early modern world depended not just on manpower or territory, but on the ability to harness and implement new technologies effectively. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire stood at the edge of collapse. Once a dominant imperial power spanning 3 continents, it had been reduced to a fragile state, struggling to survive amid war, occupation, and internal division. Decades of reform had failed to halt territorial losses, economic weakness, and political instability. What followed was not a sudden fall, but a dramatic transformation that would bring the empire to an end and give birth to a new nation. The First World War proved to be the decisive blow. Aligning with the Central Powers, Ottoman leaders believed war offered a final chance to recover lost prestige and territory. Instead, the conflict drained the empire's remaining strength. By 1918, Ottoman armies had been defeated on multiple fronts. Key cities such as Baghdad, Jerusalem, and Damascus were lost. The empire signed the Armistice of Mudros in October 1918, effectively ending its participation in the war and opening the door to Allied occupation. Following the armistice, Ottoman lands were occupied by foreign forces. British, French, Italian, and Greek troops moved into strategic regions. Istanbul itself fell under Allied control. The authority of the Sultan was severely weakened, and the central government appeared powerless. In 1920, the Treaty of Sèvres formalized this defeat. It proposed the partition of Anatolia, international control of the Straits, Greek occupation of Western Anatolia, and the creation of an Armenian state. For many Ottomans, the treaty represented not peace, but national humiliation. Amid this crisis, a new leader emerged. Mustafa Kemal, a former Ottoman officer distinguished during the Gallipoli campaign, rejected the terms of surrender. In 1919, he traveled to Anatolia and began organizing resistance against foreign occupation. Unlike previous reformers, Mustafa Kemal did not seek to save the empire. Instead, he aimed to build a sovereign nation based on national self-determination. The nationalist movement quickly gained momentum. Local resistance groups united under Mustafa Kemal's leadership. A new political center was established in Ankara, deliberately distant from the occupied capital. In 1920, the Grand National Assembly convened, declaring itself the legitimate authority of the Turkish people. This move directly challenged the authority of the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul. What followed was the Turkish War of Independence. Nationalist forces fought on multiple fronts against Greek, French, Armenian, and British-backed forces. The most intense fighting occurred in Western Anatolia, where Greek troops advanced deep into the interior. Through a combination of military discipline, popular support, and strategic leadership, nationalist forces gradually turned the tide. Major victories in 1921 and 1922 forced Greek forces to retreat, ending foreign occupation of Anatolia. As the nationalist movement gained strength, the position of the Ottoman Sultan became untenable. Seen as a symbol of submission and foreign influence, the Sultanate lost political legitimacy. In November 1922, the Grand National Assembly formally abolished the Ottoman Sultanate, ending more than 6 centuries of dynastic rule. The last sultan left Istanbul shortly afterward, marking the symbolic end of the Ottoman state. International recognition soon followed. In 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne replaced the Treaty of Sèvres. Unlike its predecessor, Lausanne recognized the sovereignty of a new Turkish state, within defined borders. Foreign occupations ended, and international control over Turkish territory was lifted. The treaty marked a diplomatic victory for the nationalist movement and confirmed the permanent dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Later that year, the Republic of Turkey was officially proclaimed, with Mustafa Kemal as its first president. The capital was moved from Istanbul to Ankara, signaling a clear break from the imperial past. The new republic was founded on principles of nationalism, sovereignty, and secular governance. Power was no longer derived from dynasty or religion, but from the nation itself. One final institution remained from the Ottoman order, the Caliphate. Though stripped of political power, it still symbolized Islamic unity. In 1924, the Turkish government abolished the Caliphate, ending an institution that had existed for centuries. This decision shocked much of the Muslim world, but reinforced the Republic's commitment to secularism and national authority. With these changes, the Ottoman Empire officially ceased to exist. Its administrative structures, titles, and symbols were dismantled. In their place arose a modern nation-state focused on reform, unity, and independence. Mustafa Kemal, later given the name Ataturk, embarked on sweeping reforms aimed at reshaping society. These included legal modernization, education reform, and the separation of religion from state affairs. The end of the Ottoman Empire was not merely the collapse of a state, but the conclusion of a historical era. For more than 600 years, the empire had governed diverse peoples across vast territories. Its legacy shaped borders, cultures, and political systems across the Middle East, the Balkans, and beyond. Yet, in an age of nationalism and global power politics, imperial structures proved unsustainable. The rise of Ataturk marked a turning point. Where the Ottomans sought survival through reform and accommodation, the nationalist movement pursued renewal through rupture. The empire's final years demonstrated the limits of gradual reform in the face of military defeat and foreign intervention. The republic that replaced it represented a new model, one grounded in national identity rather than imperial rule. Today, the end of the Ottoman Empire remains a defining moment in modern history. It reshaped regional politics and set the foundation for modern Turkey. The transition from empire to republic was marked by war, sacrifice, and radical change. It closed one of the longest chapters in imperial history and opened a new one built on sovereignty, reform, and national will. The story of the Ottoman Empire's end is ultimately a story of transformation. It reminds us that states do not simply fall, they evolve, fracture, and are replaced by new visions of political life. The rise of Ataturk and the birth of modern Turkey stand as one of the most dramatic examples of this process in the modern world.